children who are oppositional, children who demonstrate aggression, status violation, and property violation. Now, if you look at behaviors like substance abuse or risky sexual behaviors, which are characterized by poor behavioral regulation and control and deficits in what we call as the executive functions. And we look at what is emerging recently as a dimension. If for example, in DSM-5, they speak of a distinct subgroup of children with issues like aggression who are called as callous unemotional. Now, the importance of these four clusters of symptoms dimensions is that they may have a range of presentations. For example, children may present with anger that manifests as verbal aggression directed against the self, or verbal aggression directed towards others, or physical aggression towards inanimate objects, breaking stuff, smashing things, throwing stuff, and physical aggression directed at others, which cause unintentional harm. You're directing physical aggression. Your intention was not to injure grievously, but you ended up doing so. And then, of course, there are forms of really serious forms of violence. So this is the kind of range of presentation that, keeping this in mind, if you look at the effects of conduct disorder, as I said, you can call them externalizing, but you can also call them as disruptive behavior disorders. These are disorders that are associated with a whole set of issues that actually bring these kids into the consultation context. Poor academic achievement, peer rejection, low self-esteem, low frustration tolerance, poor social skills, even depressive symptoms, and then, of course, rule violation, such as truancy or getting into trouble with the police. So, if you go to the range of presentations in the background of people who have these kind of symptom dimensions, look at the kind of effects that a diagnosis may have on the kind of manifestations with which they present. If you look, on the other hand, at the consequences of aggression, so we looked at effects and we look at consequences of aggression. And you remember we spoke about aggression in all these dimensions. The kind of stuff that leads to peer rejection as one consequence of aggression. Not all aggressive children necessarily experience peer regression. But when there is inappropriate and socially incompetent behaviors or relational aggression or direct aggression, then these people have lower rates of peer-related friendship and fail to develop social competence. I beg your pardon, that should read as competence. And this constitutes a vicious cycle. And what is this vicious cycle? Aggression leading to rejection, leading to issues of reputation, to hostile peers, to retaliation and aggression, and the cycle continues. The consequences of aggression are also in school adjustment and achievement, because aggressive children are perceived as less academically successful, more behaviorally disruptive, and less motivated in class. But let's look at it in terms of elementary school and middle school. What happens in elementary school is that peer rejection, low motivation, inattentiveness, and frequent off-task and disruptive behavior is noted. Whereas in middle school, there is poor self-control, poor achievement, and a teacher's perception of these kids is lacking control and lacking motivation, and hence performing poorly. It has often been noticed that this is more pronounced in boys. And what also happens is that the negative effects on educational and career attainment can persist even into mid-adulthood. And this is why early and robust interventions of the nature that I'm going to discuss with you are exceedingly critical. Friends, look at the range of conditions in children who present with aggression. ADHD, conduct disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, Tourette's syndrome, even some children with autism and autism spectrum disorders, pervasive developmental disorders, can present with aggression. Psychosis, depression, anxiety, surprisingly, relational issues, learning issues in the context of emotional regulation problems, children with intellectual disability, post-surgical states, acute confusional states, post-ictal states following acute injury, hypothalamic dysfunction, episodic dyscontrolled rage or ictal aggression. In the clinic, therefore, if a child presents with aggression, it's important to keep this diagnosis in mind, because the differential diagnosis in mind, because medical management will differ depending on the context in which aggression is actually present. Let's shift now to certain conceptual models. Let's look at psychological and socio-cultural models. The whole idea of understanding intent attribution bias, memory bias, and the interaction of these two biases, which helps us as formulating a model. One of the things about attribution bias is the whole idea of he did that on purpose. Someone is walking by, inadvertently brushes you, but you attribute malintent, that he did it on purpose. Now, these are some of the sociocultural models based on attribution bias that one needs to keep in mind, because these are very critical in management. This is what we call as attribution of intent, which is overestimating harmful intent in others. Believing that the outcome was not the result of environmental condition, that the other person was in control of the behavior that caused the negative outcome, and that the other person intended the outcome to happen. Memory bias, on the other hand, is a judgment based on pre-existing beliefs. It's almost like a detective game that plays out in the minds of these kids. And this has actually been tested in an experimental situation. When they hear stories or when they are shown videotapes, and they recall hostile information even if it had not been present in the story. Causal schema is a mental picture or a map of what we expect to happen in a given situation and how to behave appropriately in that situation and what outcome we can expect. It is composed of several scripts. The importance of this schema is that it helps to focus on whatever is important in that setting, because the products of our accumulated experiences are stored in memory. Let me explain this a little further. These schema, these biases, the question of how they support aggression, there are many ways in which this can be tested. Aggressive boys see hostile intent in an ambiguous situation. Videotapes in situations which have negative outcome. And if you ask people to judge the causes. They will always attribute hostile causes rather than accidental, or the fact that the intention was to be helpful, but it had a negative consequence. So these are some theories which explain why biases actually support aggression. The social information processing model, on the other hand, which is based on problem solving and theories of information processing. Now, children engage in various mental steps before enacting competent or incompetent behaviors when faced with social situational cues. What do these include? An encoding of social cues, interpretation and representation of those cues, clarification of what I want to do, how I need to respond, a response access or construction, a response decision, and a behavioral enactment. Therefore, in medical management, both psychosocial, psychological on the one hand and pharmacological on the other, particularly when we are talking about psychosocial and psychological management, it's very important to break steps. So if anger is an issue, if physical aggression is an issue, breaking objects is an issue, what was the context or the cue in which it occurred? How was that cue encoded? How was it interpreted and represented? What did the person decide to do as an action? What then was the construction of the response, that I will pick up this object and I will throw and break it? How was a decision finally reached? And how did the behavior actually take place? Because if these steps are broken down, you can intervene at any step here so that it does not culminate in the ultimate act of aggression. You can abort it at the level of the response decision itself, at the level of response access, at the level of clarification of goal, at the level of interpretation itself. It does not proceed to the final behavioral end expression. This is because aggressive children attend to fewer social cues. They direct their attention selectively towards hostile social cues. They interpret stimuli in a hostile way. They generate fewer solutions. And in evaluating possible solutions, they are more confident that aggression will provide tangible rewards and will reduce aversive treatment by others. And they are more confident in their ability to enact an aggressive response. The social cognitive model of anger and aggression, it speaks of cognitive deficiencies and cognitive distortions. So poor problem-solving abilities, you remember when I spoke about life skills the last time? High impulse control, action-oriented solutions, and poor consequential thinking. And here there's a difficulty in sustaining and focusing attention, and high anticipation of hostile intent, and they act out on that basis. So this is what happens, that there is a stimulation event, frustration, causing frustration and annoyance. It generates a certain thinking process characterized by distortion and deficiencies. There is an arousal there, autonomic arousal, tension. That generates the anger and cognitive labeling that this is intolerable. He did it on purpose. He's a bad person. I need to retaliate. And therefore, a behavioral response of aggression or submission, as the case may be. And as you can see, it's a two-way process that goes on. And this behavioral response gives rise to further events, and the whole chain and cycle gets repeated. So, in summary, the problem of these children can be conceptualized as 4 trouble spots: limited ability to process and solve problems, distorted perception regarding events, antisocial values, and emotional dysregulation. Now, these four problem spots are important because this is precisely where medical management starts. And by medical and clinical management, I mean a combination of psychosocial, psychological, as well as behavioral and pharmacological interventions, depending on the context and the severity, as the case may be. Some